welcome back. Super appreciate you being in here. We're gonna get into like the meat and potatoes of a lot of practitionership into how you execute just being a high-level realtor and really managing clients the best that you can in order to make sure that the entire process goes well. And in order to make the entire process go well, we've got to have a great foundation. And part of establishing that foundation is a buyer presentation for buyers. We're going to get into here in a second why we do a buyer presentation at all, kind of like what that is, and then we're going to break down every single detail into a buyer prezo in some videos moving forward. But right now, let's just establish why we do a buyer presentation, and then about 99% of ours are at minimum a Zoom call, right? And them seeing your face, facial expressions, all of that stuff, being able to share some things on video, screen share things. I'm sure Eli's showing you guys all that smart guy stuff. There's a reason why Zoom calls do so well. In addition to that, if you can do it in person or if people prefer in person, that's also feasible, right? But at minimum, getting folks on a Zoom call is super huge. If you're not too savvy with like Zoom calls, get savvy with them, because if you're operating YouTube or anything else, you could be having people from out of state, et cetera, et cetera. They just don't necessarily have the opportunity to be in person, right? But with that being said, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this shorter video and give you guys why we do a buyer presentation. All right, so your first principle as far as why we're doing this in the first place is to really just set expectations. If they're new to Colorado, or if they're new to the buying process, or if they just haven't done that in a while, setting expectations not only of just the entire process and what's going to happen, but just setting expectations of what current market looks like, what the current buying process looks like. So for example, when we were going through that hot market year to date on this, we're looking at just before 2023 right now. So at the beginning of 2022, when things were 1.9 to 2.2% interest rates, and you had everybody and their mom trying to buy, and you had very low inventory, prepping them and setting expectations for what they were getting into in the first place is a great example of why we set expectations, right? So big indicator. So it's not just what they can expect from you, and you should be advising them expectations of what you have on yourself, what they can expect from you, but then also what you expect from their side and how they can contribute. And one of the number one things, guys, as you start getting into more leadership is, if you really want to have a great process, you've got to give people a role, even buyers or sellers. They've got to have involvement. They've got to contribute, right? Tony Robbins talks a lot about the power of contribution. Allow people to be a part of that team. Allow people to contribute. You've just got to figure out what that looks like. We're going to get into that in more videos, but they've got to be a part of that mission. At the end of the day, you work for them, so they've got to be in it. They've got to understand it, and they've got to be willing to contribute to their side while you contribute to theirs as well. All right, guys, the second reason why we do this is because super early on, right out of the gate, you guys want to establish an advisory role. So they've already reached out to you. They already want to work with you. That's a great first step. That second step, as far as being on this Zoom call or in person and going through this entire buyer process, they're listening to you, right? In a place of like being open to listening to you. There's nothing specific that they have to agree or disagree with you on this. This is really just them taking in all of the information and you advising them on current market situations, you advising them on tools and how we're going to go through this process. And it really opens their mind, but subconsciously, without them even realizing it, you're establishing that, hey, you're going to be the advisor, you're going to be the quarterback during this time, right? And it's not that the quarterback doesn't need receivers and blockers and everybody to do their part. It's just that your advisement is going to be super important. Your recommendations are going to be super important when it comes to this process, right? So the second point is, bottom line, you want to establish that advisory role as soon as possible, and a buyer prezo really gives you a platform and an opportunity to establish that. All right, and finally, number three, it kind of leads into number two, but it's no one is in any type of emotional state, okay? So if you guys are trying to get somebody to hear you, if you're trying to advise and go through a process, if they're already in the middle of that process while you're trying to teach it or explain it, it could sound like you're trying to talk them into something. If they're emotional about it and they're doubting something or they're unsure of something, they're also doubting and they're unsure of the vehicle, which is you, the person that's saying things to them, right? So for an example, if it's a super competitive house, super competitive weekend, there's several offers going in on a home and it's coming down to the wire and you might have somebody calling you for a counter or they're wanting you to resubmit. If you're teaching them the difference between a counter and resubmitting. If you're teaching them appraisal gaps, escalation clauses, inspection options, if you're trying to teach that while you're under the gun of having to get this counter sent back in or resubmitted or just submitted in the first place, you're trying to explain the tools and skill set that you could be using during the process while you're in the process, they're confused. They're also feeling rushed. And most buyers, believe it or not, whether they've gone through this process or not, if they're unknown, if they're stressed, if they're down to the wire and they haven't been prepped, even though it's just submitting that offer or resubmitting or submitting a counter to then win the offer, a lot of them have this impression that they're buying a house. The last thing you want people feeling like when it's coming down to the wire and it's competitive and we've got to change some things, whatever it may be, is that they're now committing to this house. That's not true. We've got plenty of due diligence. We're going to talk about that in videos moving on from this video. But what I'm getting at, guys, is if you've ever been in a relationship and someone's emotional at you or upset or whatever emotion you want to stamp on it, you ever just tell them to calm down? If you have, then you get why I'm laughing. If you haven't, then you haven't been in a real relationship and made enough mistakes to have that laugh. I encourage you to go mess up and have that laugh one day. But the bottom line is, once they're in that state, they're not looking at you as an advisor. They're going to fall back on what they think they know. They're going to trust their guts. And sometimes their gut is going to tell them to play it safe. And if they're on the fence, and they're going into that side. But here's what I really want you to understand. We've had a lot of clients come to us. We were not their first realtor. We've had a lot of clients go through a stressful process with the realtor. And not only did they decide to pull out on a contract or not submit, and then, come to us, that realtor lost that business. But then when we hear the stories as far as what was going on during the process, we could tell very clearly that the realtor wasn't necessarily making any mistakes except for the leadership and advisement side where there was a lack of communication, and that realtor just made those clients feel like they're rushed. It wasn't like they were doing anything unethical or trying to talk them into anything. It was really just about the emotional side and the uneducated side that made clients feel uneasy about a process, which then ultimately made them not only commit to that offer, but they walked away from that realtor, right? So this is super important stuff as far as why we're going to be doing this. Those are my 3 main bullet points for you guys. With that being said, let's move forward. Let's see you guys in the next video, and let's really get into the meat and potatoes of all of what I'm talking about.